The atmosphere was electric as crowds gathered outside the packed Chicago arena where Donald Trump's campaign rally was set to take place. Excitement and tension filled the air as supporters eagerly awaited the candidate's arrival, while protesters assembled with signs and chants, determined to make their voices heard. Little did anyone know that this night would unfold in ways no one could have predicted, setting off a chain of events that would captivate the nation and challenge assumptions on all sides. As the doors opened and people began filing into the arena, a group of protesters saw their opportunity. They had meticulously planned this moment, coordinating to breach security and infiltrate the venue. Their goal was clear: to disrupt the rally and prevent Trump from speaking at all costs. Once inside, the protesters quickly sprang into action. They began shouting and chanting, unfurling banners, and creating a chaotic scene. Trump supporters reacted with anger and confusion as scuffles broke out across the arena floor. Security guards rushed to contain the situation but were quickly overwhelmed by the scale of the disruption. On stage, campaign officials huddled in urgent discussion as they assessed the deteriorating situation. The decision was quickly made to cancel the event for safety reasons. An announcement came over the loudspeaker urging all attendees to calmly exit the arena. Outside, the chaos spilled into the streets as protesters celebrated their victory while frustrated Trump supporters voiced their outrage at having the rally shut down. Police struggled to maintain order as heated confrontations threatened to escalate into violence. As footage of the mayhem began circulating on social media and news outlets, it became clear that this was more than just an isolated incident. The successful shutdown of the Chicago rally emboldened protesters who vowed to repeat these tactics at future campaign events. Many Trump supporters began expressing fear about attending rallies, worried they could be caught up in similar chaos. The Trump campaign found itself at a crossroads. How could they continue holding large public events if protesters were able to so easily derail them? The very core of Trump's unconventional, high-energy campaign style was under threat. But as some began to write off Trump's rallies as too risky to continue, an unexpected group was about to enter the fray and change everything. Hundreds of miles away in a small Florida town, a group of veterans were gathering at their local VFW hall, sharing drinks and swapping stories as they usually did on Friday nights. The TV behind the bar was tuned to a news channel showing footage of the canceled Chicago rally. Chris Cox, leader of a large veterans motorcycle club, found his attention drawn to the chaotic scenes playing out on screen. As he watched protesters clash with rally attendees and overwhelmed security guards, a familiar feeling began to stir in his gut, the same protective instinct that had driven him to serve his country years ago. "This ain't right," Chris muttered, shaking his head. "Someone's got to do something before this gets even more out of hand." The other vets nodded in grim agreement. They had all sworn an oath to defend the Constitution, including the right to free speech and peaceful assembly. Seeing American citizens prevented from gathering to support a presidential candidate didn't sit well with any of them, regardless of their personal political views. Chris's mind was already racing, formulating a plan. He turned to address the group. "Boys, I think it's time we suit up again. Our country needs us." The veterans listened intently as Chris laid out his idea. Their motorcycle club, with over 30,000 members nationwide, was perfectly positioned to provide volunteer security at Trump rallies. They had the numbers, the discipline, and the commitment to service needed to maintain order and protect free speech. "We're not going there looking for trouble," Chris emphasized. "Our job will be to stand as a buffer between protesters and rally attendees. We'll work with local law enforcement to keep the peace and make sure everyone's rights are respected." The idea was met with enthusiastic approval. These men and women had dedicated their lives to serving their country, and this felt like a continuation of that mission. They would be defending the very democratic principles they had fought for overseas. Over the next few days, Chris worked tirelessly to coordinate with other veterans groups and motorcycle clubs across the country. The response was overwhelming, with thousands volunteering to help secure future Trump rallies. Their first test came just a week later at a large outdoor rally in Florida. As attendees began arriving, they were greeted by the impressive sight of hundreds of veterans lined up along the entry points, creating a human barrier between the rally area and the designated protest zones. The veterans cut an intimidating figure in their leather vests adorned with military patches, many still sporting the physiques they had honed during their service years. But their demeanor was calm and professional as they carefully watched the crowds for any signs of trouble. When a small group of protesters attempted to push past the security line, the veterans quickly moved to intercept them. Instead of responding with force, they engaged the protesters in conversation, listening to their concerns while firmly but respectfully explaining that they couldn't allow the rally to be disrupted. To everyone's surprise, the tense confrontation ended with handshakes as the protesters agreed to return to the designated area. Word quickly spread through the crowds about the veterans' presence and their measured approach to maintaining order. As the rally proceeded without incident, it became clear that the veterans' intervention had dramatically changed the dynamic. Protesters were forced to rethink their tactics, realizing that rushing the stage or picking fights was no longer a viable option. Trump supporters felt a renewed sense of security, no longer worried about being caught in the middle of chaotic clashes. The overall atmosphere was one of greater calm and respect between opposing sides. In the days that followed, Chris's phone was flooded with messages from Trump campaign officials, local law enforcement agencies, and veterans groups across the country. Everyone wanted to know how they could implement this model at future events. Chris found himself thrust into an unexpected leadership role, coordinating a rapidly growing network of volunteer veterans dedicated to protecting free speech and the democratic process. What had started as a small group of concerned citizens had blossomed into a nationwide movement. But as the veterans' presence at Trump rallies grew, so did the challenges they faced. The long hours, constant travel, and potential for confrontation began to take their toll both physically and financially on the volunteers. Chris received a troubling call from the group's treasurer one evening. "We've got a problem," the man said gravely. "Our funds are running dangerously low. Between travel costs, equipment, and basic necessities for our volunteers, we're burning through money faster than donations are coming in." The news hit Chris like a punch to the gut. He had been so focused on the mission that he hadn't stopped to consider the practical realities of sustaining such a large operation. The thought of having to scale back their efforts or even shut down entirely due to lack of funds was heartbreaking. But as he had done so many times before in his military career, Chris refused to accept defeat. He knew there had to be a solution, he just had to think creatively to find it. As he pondered their options, Chris's eyes fell on his old chainsaw propped in the corner of his workshop. A skilled wood carver, he had often created intricate sculptures as a hobby. Suddenly, an idea began to form. The next day, Chris loaded up his truck with his carving equipment and headed out to a local wooded area. Selecting several sturdy logs, he got to work, the roar of his chainsaw echoing through the trees as he skillfully shaped the wood. Hours later, Chris stood back to admire his handiwork, a collection of beautifully carved patriotic sculptures featuring eagles, flags, and other American symbols. Loading them carefully into his truck, he set up a roadside stand along a busy highway. To his amazement, the sculptures began selling almost immediately. Travelers were drawn in by the intricate designs and powerful imagery, eager to own a piece of handcrafted Americana. By the end of the first day, Chris had earned enough to cover a significant portion of their immediate expenses. Energized by this success, Chris began teaching other veterans in the group his carving techniques. Soon they had a network of roadside stands across multiple states, with all proceeds going directly to support their rally security efforts. The Carvings for a Cause initiative, as it came to be known, not only solved their financial troubles but also gave many veterans a new sense of purpose and creative outlet. It became a powerful symbol of their resourcefulness and dedication to the mission. As news of the veterans' efforts spread, they began receiving invitations to provide security at events for candidates across the political spectrum. Chris made it clear that their services were available to any peaceful political gathering, regardless of party affiliation. "We're not here to push an agenda," he explained in interviews. "Our job is to defend every American's right to participate in the democratic process without fear or intimidation." That's what we swore to protect, and that's what we'll continue to do. This nonpartisan approach earned the veterans group widespread respect and helped diffuse much of the tension that had been building around political rallies. Even those who disagreed with the candidates being protected often expressed appreciation for the veterans' fair and professional conduct. But not everyone was happy with this new state of affairs. Some of the more extreme elements on both sides of the political divide saw the veterans as interfering with their goals of disruption and confrontation. Rumors began circulating online questioning the veterans' motives and alleging they were secretly in the pay of various political entities. Chris found himself and his organization the target of vicious social media attacks and even threats of violence. Despite the pressure, Chris remained committed to their mission. He knew that by staying true to their principles of nonpartisanship and respect for all, they would ultimately prevail against those seeking to sow division. As the presidential campaign entered its final months, all eyes turned to the upcoming party conventions. These massive gatherings were seen as potential powder kegs, with tensions running high and protesters vowing to shut them down by any means necessary. Chris and his team worked around the clock to prepare, coordinating with local law enforcement, convention organizers, and thousands of veteran volunteers from across the country. They knew that these events would be the ultimate test of their abilities and their commitment to maintaining peace. The Republican National Convention in Cleveland was first up, and as expected, the city was a hive of activity as the event approached. Supporters and protesters poured in from all over, and the atmosphere crackled with nervous energy. Chris stationed his veterans at key points around the convention center, creating what they called a wall of honor, a human barrier of disciplined, level-headed individuals committed to keeping the peace. Their very presence seemed to have a calming effect on the crowds, with many potential troublemakers thinking twice before attempting to cause disruption. Inside the convention hall, attendees commented on the noticeable difference in atmosphere compared to previous rallies. There was still plenty of enthusiasm and spirited debate, but gone was the undercurrent of tension and fears that had marred earlier events. Just as it seemed the convention might pass without major incident, chaos erupted near one of the entrances. A group of protesters had managed to breach the initial security perimeter and were making a mad dash towards the main stage where Trump was speaking. Chris's heart raced as he spotted the commotion, immediately recognizing the grave threat this posed. Without hesitation, he signaled to the veterans nearest the stage, who sprang into action with the coordinated precision of a military unit. In a breathtaking moment captured by news cameras, the veterans smoothly intercepted the charging protesters, forming an impenetrable human wall between them and the stage. The would-be disruptors found themselves suddenly face-to-face with a line of stone-faced veterans, many bearing the scars and medals of past service. The lead protester, a young man clutching what appeared to be some kind of device, skidded to a halt as he realized his path was blocked. For a tense moment, it seemed violence might erupt as he attempted to push through the veterans' line. But Chris and his team held firm, their expressions remaining calm but resolute. "Stand down, son," one of the veterans said quietly. "This isn't the way." Whether it was the veterans' words or simply the realization that they were hopelessly outnumbered, the fight seemed to go out of the protesters. As police arrived to take control of the situation, the device in the lead protester's hand was revealed to be a smoke bomb that could have caused panic if detonated in the crowded hall. As the convention resumed and the adrenaline of the moment faded, Chris found himself overcome with a mix of emotions. Pride in his team's flawless response, relief that a potential tragedy had been averted, but also sadness that things had reached this point of division in the country he loved. The incident made headlines across the nation, with many hailing the veterans as heroes who had prevented the convention from descending into chaos. Footage of their calm but decisive intervention was played on repeat on news channels, becoming a powerful symbol of strength and restraint in the face of volatility. In the days that followed, Chris's phone rang constantly with messages of support and gratitude. But the call that meant the most came from an unexpected source, the mother of the young protester who had led the charge towards the stage. Through tears, she thanked Chris and his team for stopping her son without harming him. "I don't agree with your politics," she said, "but I'm grateful for the way you handled things. You treated my boy with more understanding than he probably deserved in that moment." That conversation stuck with Chris, reinforcing his belief that their approach of firm but compassionate intervention was the right one. By refusing to demonize those on the other side and instead treating them with basic human dignity, they were planting seeds of mutual understanding that might one day help heal the nation's divides. As the general election approached, the veterans' role expanded beyond just providing security at rallies. They began organizing community outreach events, bringing together people from across the political spectrum for town halls and service projects. These gatherings, dubbed Common Ground Initiatives, provided a space for real dialogue between individuals who might otherwise never interact. Participants were encouraged to share their personal stories and concerns, finding unexpected areas of agreement even amidst their differences. One particularly powerful moment came during a town hall in a small Midwestern community that had been bitterly divided over economic issues. A factory worker who had lost his job to outsourcing and blamed immigration policies found himself seated next to a young immigrant entrepreneur. As they shared their experiences, the two men realized they actually wanted many of the same things: economic security, opportunities for their children, and a chance to contribute to their community. While they still disagreed on specific policies, they left with a newfound respect for each other's perspectives. These small breakthroughs began to add up, creating ripple effects throughout communities. Local leaders took notice, reaching out to Chris and his team for advice on how to implement similar programs in their own areas. The veterans' efforts didn't go unnoticed at the highest levels either. As the election results were tallied and Donald Trump emerged victorious, Chris received an unexpected phone call. "Mr. Cox," said the voice on the other end, "this is the president-elect's office. He'd like to speak with you." Chris's heart raced as he was patched through to Trump himself. The newly elected president expressed his deep gratitude for the veterans' work in maintaining order at his rallies and praised their ongoing efforts to bridge divides in communities. "You and your team exemplify the very best of America," Trump said. "Your service to our country didn't end when you left the military. You've continued to defend our most fundamental rights and values. I want you to know that your work has not gone unnoticed." The conversation left Chris feeling a mix of pride and humility. While it was gratifying to receive recognition from the president-elect, he knew that the real impact of their work went far beyond any one political figure or party. As Inauguration Day approached, Chris and his team faced their biggest challenge yet. With tensions in the country still running high, there were concerns about potential unrest during the transfer of power. The veterans were called upon to assist with security for the massive event, working alongside law enforcement agencies from across the nation. In the weeks leading up to the inauguration, Chris hardly slept as he coordinated logistics and trained thousands of volunteers. They prepared for every possible scenario, determined that this crucial moment in American democracy would proceed peacefully. The day of the inauguration dawned cold and clear in Washington, D.C. As Chris surveyed the National Mall filled with a sea of people, he felt the weight of history on his shoulders. This was what they had been working towards all these months, not just the protection of one man or one party, but the preservation of the democratic process itself. As Trump took the oath of office, Chris and his team remained vigilant, their eyes constantly scanning the crowds for any signs of trouble. There were a few tense moments when protesters attempted to disrupt the proceedings, but the veterans' presence helped quickly defuse the situations without violence. When the ceremony concluded without major incident, there was a palpable sense of relief and accomplishment among the volunteers. They had played a crucial role in ensuring a peaceful transition of power, the cornerstone of American democracy. In the months and years that followed, the impact of the veterans' work continued to ripple outward. Their model of engaged, nonpartisan citizenship inspired similar initiatives across the country. Community organizations, schools, and even corporations began implementing programs aimed at fostering dialogue and finding common ground. Chris found himself increasingly in demand as a speaker and consultant, sharing the lessons learned from their experiences with audiences around the world. He emphasized that their success wasn't due to any special techniques or skills, but simply a commitment to seeing the humanity in every person, even those with whom they disagreed. The biggest threat to our democracy isn't any particular politician or party, Chris would often say in his talks. It's the idea that our fellow citizens are our enemies just because they see things differently. The moment we lose sight of our shared hopes and dreams as Americans is the moment we truly begin to lose our way as a nation. The Veterans Organization continued to evolve, adapting to meet new challenges as they arose. They expanded their focus beyond just political events, offering their services to help maintain order at other large gatherings prone to conflict, from contentious school board meetings to heated labor negotiations. Their reputation for fairness and professionalism led to them being called upon as mediators in various disputes. Whether it was a neighborhood conflict over zoning laws or a national debate on healthcare policy, the veterans brought their unique blend of discipline, compassion, and commitment to finding common ground. One of their most impactful initiatives was a youth mentorship program that paired veterans with at-risk teens from diverse backgrounds. By sharing their experiences and values, the veterans helped guide young people towards productive paths, instilling in them a sense of civic responsibility and respect for others. As the years passed, Chris began to see tangible signs that their efforts were making a difference. Political rallies, once hotbeds of confrontation and violence, became more orderly affairs where opposing views could be expressed without fear. Community forums that had once devolved into shouting matches now featured thoughtful debates and collaborative problem-solving. Perhaps most encouragingly, Chris noticed a shift in the way people spoke about those with different political beliefs. The dehumanizing rhetoric that had once been commonplace was gradually being replaced by more nuanced discussions that acknowledged the complexity of issues and the validity of diverse perspectives. Of course, challenges remained. There were still those on the fringes who rejected the idea of finding common ground, preferring conflict and division. But they found themselves increasingly isolated as more and more Americans embraced a more unified vision of their country. As Chris approached the twilight of his career, he reflected on the journey that had begun with that fateful Trump rally years ago. What had started as a simple desire to maintain order had blossomed into a movement that had helped reshape the fabric of American democracy. He thought about all the lives that had been touched, the protesters and supporters who had found unexpected common ground, the communities that had healed long-standing divides, the young people who had discovered a sense of purpose through service. While Chris knew that the work of bridging divides and fostering understanding would never truly be finished, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction in how far they had come. The veterans had stayed true to their oath to defend the Constitution, not through force of arms, but through the power of empathy, respect, and unwavering commitment to the ideals that bound all Americans together. As he prepared to pass the torch to a new generation of leaders, Chris offered them the same advice he had given countless others over the years. Remember that beneath every political label, every strongly held opinion, is a human being with hopes, fears, and dreams not so different from your own. Our job is not to change minds, but to open hearts. To create spaces where real understanding can take root. Because it's in those moments of genuine connection that we remember what truly makes America great, not our differences, but our shared commitment to the principles of liberty, justice, and equality for all. The legacy of Chris and his fellow veterans would continue to shape American civic life for years to come. Their example served as a powerful reminder that even in the most divided times, there is always hope for unity when citizens are willing to reach across the aisle, listen with open minds, and work together for the common good. As the sun set on another day in America, Chris looked out over the nation he had served for so long, not just as a soldier, but as a peacemaker, a bridge builder, and a guardian of democracy. He saw a country that, while still facing challenges, was stronger and more united than it had been in generations. And he knew that as long as there were those willing to stand up for the principles of respect, understanding, and shared purpose, the great American experiment would continue to thrive, offering hope and inspiration to the world. The story of the veterans who changed the course of a tumultuous election season had become more than just a viral video or a footnote in history books. It had become a blueprint for civic engagement, a testament to the power of principled action, and a beacon of hope for a nation in need of healing. As Chris prepared for bed that night, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from a young woman who had been one of the protesters at that first rally years ago. She had since become a community organizer herself, using the lessons she'd learned from the veterans to bring people together across political and social divides. "Thank you," the message read, "for showing us a better way. For believing in the best of America even when it was hard to see. We're carrying your torch forward." Chris smiled as he set the phone down, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. The work would go on, carried forward by countless individuals committed to the idea that what unites Americans is far stronger than what divides them. And so, as the nation looked to the future, the legacy of those unexpected heroes, the veterans who had stood up to protect not just a candidate or a party, but the very foundations of American democracy, continued to light the way towards a more perfect union. Their story served as a powerful reminder that in times of great challenge and division, hope can emerge from the most unexpected places. That with courage, compassion, and unwavering commitment to our shared values, ordinary citizens have the power to change the course of history and build a brighter future for all. As dawn broke on a new day in America, the echoes of that fateful rally could still be heard, not in shouts of anger or cries of division, but in the steady heartbeat of a nation that had rediscovered its common purpose and recommitted itself to the enduring promise of democracy. And so, the journey continued, with each new generation taking up the mantle of civic responsibility, guided by the timeless wisdom that had seen America through its darkest hours, that united we stand, divided we fall, and that the truest measure of our greatness lies not in our ability to defeat our enemies, but in our willingness to turn them into friends. The video that had once shocked the world had become a catalyst for transformation, a reminder of the power of courage, compassion, and unwavering commitment to the ideals that make America truly great. And as long as there were those willing to stand up for these principles, to bridge divides and foster understanding, the promise of a more perfect union would remain alive and well, a beacon of hope for generations to come.